Oklahoma Territory, 1888. The autumn storm came down like the wrath of God himself, and Abigail Sterling had stopped caring whether she lived or died. Cold rain lashed her face, soaking through her burgundy dress until it clung heavy to her shivering frame. Wind screamed across the open prairie, bending the grass nearly flat and stealing the breath from her lungs. She stumbled forward through the mud, her legs barely holding her weight, her vision blurring with exhaustion and cold. Behind her, somewhere in that howling darkness, Elias Kincaid was hunting. The man she'd fled from. The man whose promises had been pretty lies wrapped around ugly truth. She'd rather die out here in the storm than go back to what he'd planned for her. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the endless prairie for one brilliant second. In that flash, she saw him. A rider on horseback coming straight toward her through the rain. Her heart lurched with terror. He'd found her. After everything, after running until her feet bled and her lungs burned, Kincaid had caught up. She tried to run, but her legs gave out. She fell hard into the mud, gasping, too exhausted to rise. The horse's hoofbeats grew louder, closer. She closed her eyes and waited for rough hands to drag her up, for his voice promising punishment. Instead, a different voice cut through the storm, deep and urgent, but not cruel. Not his. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She forced her eyes open. The rider had dismounted and was crouching beside her in the mud. Lightning flashed again, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. A man in his early 30s with dark brown hair, plastered to his head by rain. Strong features shadowed with concern. Blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wore a tan work shirt soaked through, dark vest, and a brown cowboy hat that dripped water from its brim. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "Don't send me back." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of desperation when he saw it. He didn't ask questions. He simply pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. "You're safe now." He set her on his horse, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure against his chest as he urged the horse forward. She should have been afraid. She was alone with a stranger in the middle of nowhere, helpless and half frozen. But something in his voice, in the careful way he held her, made her believe those 3 words. "You're safe now." They rode through the storm for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, buildings emerged from the rain, dark shapes that resolved into a ranch house, barn, and outbuildings. He guided the horse right up to the porch, then dismounted and lifted her down. "Can you walk?" She tried. Her legs buckled immediately. He caught her before she fell, then simply picked her up again and carried her up the porch steps. He kicked the door open and brought her inside, out of the wind and rain at last. The warmth hit her like a physical blow. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across simple but sturdy furniture. He set her carefully in a chair near the fire, then disappeared for a moment. When he returned, he had blankets and towels. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, his tone matter of fact. "There's a room through that door." I'll leave dry things on the bed. Take your time." He handed her the blankets and turned away, giving her privacy even though she was too exhausted to manage much modesty. She stared at his broad back, at the way his wet shirt clung to muscular shoulders, and something tight in her chest loosened just slightly. "Why are you helping me?" Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. He glanced back at her, and in the firelight she could see his face clearly for the first time. Handsome, in a rugged way, with a straight nose and a jaw covered in light stubble. But it was his eyes that held her, blue and direct, with shadows that suggested he knew something about running from the past. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "And because I know what it's like to run from something you can't face going back to." Before she could respond, he left the room. She heard him moving around in the kitchen, heard water being poured and the clank of a kettle. Slowly, her frozen muscles cooperating just barely, she made her way to the room he'd indicated. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. On the bed lay a man's flannel shirt, too large for her, but dry and warm. She peeled off her soaked dress with shaking hands, her fingers clumsy with cold. The shirt came down past her knees and smelled faintly of soap and wood smoke. She wrapped herself in one of the blankets he'd given her and returned to the fire. He was there, holding a tin cup. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of coffee. He handed it to her without a word, and she wrapped her hands around its warmth gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered. He settled into the chair across from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. Now that she wasn't fighting for survival, she could take in more details. The way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, the breadth of his shoulders, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way he kept his distance, giving her space even as concern showed clear in his eyes. "I'm Elijah Chambers," he said. "This is my ranch. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Abigail Sterling. Her voice was steadier now, warmth beginning to seep back into her bones. "And I don't have anywhere else to go." Something flickered in his expression. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition. "Then you'll stay here. You don't even know me. I could be anyone. A thief, a liar. You're a woman who ran into a storm rather than face whatever was behind you." His blue eyes met hers directly. "That tells me enough." She wanted to look away from that steady gaze, but found she couldn't. "The man hunting me is Elias Kincaid. He's smart, and he's dangerous, and he doesn't give up. If he finds out I'm here, he'll come for me. You could get hurt. Let him come." There was no bravado in Elijah's voice, just quiet certainty. "This is my land, and you're under my protection now." The words should have sounded presumptuous, maybe even threatening, but they didn't. They sounded like a promise, like safety she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Abigail took a sip of coffee, letting the hot liquid warm her from the inside out. Outside, the storm still raged, wind howling around the corners of the house and rain drumming on the roof. But inside, wrapped in borrowed clothes and firelight, she felt the tight knot of terror in her chest begin to loosen just slightly. "Who was he?" Elijah asked quietly. "This man you're running from." She stared into her coffee cup, watching steam curl upward. Part of her wanted to keep her secrets, to protect herself with silence. But this man had pulled her from a storm and offered sanctuary without asking for anything in return. He deserved some truth. A con man, she said finally. Though I didn't know it at first. He came to Guthrie 3 months ago, calling himself a land speculator. Charming, well-dressed, full of grand plans. My uncle had just died and left me his homestead here in the territory, 40 acres and a small house. Not much, but it was mine. Kincaid wanted the land. He wanted more than that. Bitterness crept into her voice. He courted me, brought me flowers, took me to church socials, played the perfect gentleman, talked about building a future together. I was lonely and foolish enough to believe him. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just listened, his attention complete and unwavering in a way that made her want to tell him everything. I found out the truth 2 weeks ago. One of his associates got drunk and ran his mouth in the saloon. Kincaid's done this before, in 3 other territories. Finds women with property, woos them, marries them. Then either drives them off or worse, wants the deeds in his name. The last woman who married him disappeared. No one's seen her since. So you ran. I tried to be smart about it first. Went to the territorial marshal. Told him everything. But Kincaid's got friends in Guthrie. Men who owe him favors or fear him. The marshal said there was nothing he could do without proof. Told me to go home and be careful. She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. That night, Kincaid came to my door. He knew I'd talked to the marshal. Knew I'd figured him out. He said I had 2 choices: marry him willingly and sign over the deed, or he'd arrange for me to have an accident and take the land anyway. Said no one would believe a hysterical woman over a respected businessman. So you left. That same night. Took what I could carry and ran. I've been moving south and west for 2 weeks, staying off main roads. Sleeping rough. But he's been following. I've seen his men in towns I passed through, asking about me. Tonight I thought I'd lost them, but then the storm came and I couldn't see where I was going and... Her voice broke slightly. And then, you found me. Elijah was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hard. He won't touch you here. I give you my word. You don't understand. Elias Kincaid is smart and patient and ruthless. He'll figure out where I am eventually. And when he does, he'll find out what happens when someone threatens what's mine to protect. The words hung in the air between them. Abigail felt her pulse quicken, though whether from fear or something else entirely she couldn't say. There was no arrogance in Elijah's tone, no masculine posturing. Just that same quiet certainty, the promise of a man who meant every word he said. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk that for a stranger? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity, not lust, something deeper and more complicated. Because 5 years ago, I was running too, he said quietly. From a war that wouldn't let me go, from things I'd done that I couldn't take back. A man gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one, let me work his ranch, and didn't ask questions about my past. He died 2 years back and left me this place. Said everyone deserves a chance to start over, and I should pass that gift along when I could. He set his coffee cup down and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You're not the only one who's been hunted, Abigail. And you're not the only one who knows what it's like to run until you can't run anymore. The difference is, I had someone help me. Now I'm helping you. Something tight and painful in Abigail's chest cracked open. She'd been alone for so long, carrying her fear and desperation like stones in her pockets, weighing her down with every step. But sitting here in this firelit room with this quiet, steady man, she felt the weight begin to lift. I don't have any money, she said. I can't pay you for room and board. Didn't ask for money. Then what do you want? His lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. Help around the place wouldn't go amiss. Can you cook? Yes. Mend clothes? I'm decent with a needle. Then we'll call it even. You help with the house, and I'll keep you safe. Fair trade. It was more than fair. It was salvation wrapped in flannel and offered with calloused hands. Abigail felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She'd cried enough these past 2 weeks. Time to be strong. All right, she said. Thank you, Elijah. Truly. He nodded, then rose from his chair. You should rest. The spare room's yours for as long as you need it. Storm should blow through by morning, and we can figure things out then. She watched him bank the fire and check the door was bolted. Simple domestic tasks that somehow felt protective. When he turned back to her, she was struck again by his presence. Not overwhelming or aggressive, but solid, dependable, like bedrock you could build on. Elijah, she said, as he headed toward what she assumed was his own room. He paused, looking back. That man who helped you, did you ever find peace with what you'd run from? His expression softened. Working on it. Every day, I'm working on it. Do you think I will? Find peace, I mean. I think, he said carefully, that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build, one day at a time, with people who give a damn whether you make it or not. With that, he disappeared into his room, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the storm outside. Abigail pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared into the glowing embers. For the first time in weeks, she let herself believe she might survive this. More than that, she might actually live. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the small ranch house, Abigail Sterling slept soundly for the first time since she'd fled into the darkness. And across the hall, Elijah Chambers lay awake, listening to the wind and thinking about the terrified woman he'd pulled from the mud. He'd told her the truth about his past, about running from the war. What he hadn't told her was that he'd been running from more than memories. He'd been running from himself, from the man he'd become in those blood-soaked years. Coming here had saved him, given him purpose and peace he'd never expected to find. Now there was a woman under his roof who needed saving too. A woman with green eyes full of ghosts and a spine of pure steel beneath all that fear. She'd run into a killing storm rather than submit to a man who wanted to destroy her. That kind of courage deserved protection. And maybe, just maybe, she deserved more than that. Elijah pushed the thought away. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing its own challenges. For tonight, it was enough to know she was safe and warm and sleeping without fear for the first time in weeks. He'd make sure it stayed that way, no matter what it cost. Morning came gray and quiet, the storm having blown itself out sometime before dawn. Abigail woke to pale sunlight streaming through a crack in the curtains and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she didn't know where she was, and panic seized her. Then, memory flooded back. The storm, the rider, the sanctuary, offered by a stranger with kind eyes and strong hands. She dressed in her own clothes, now dry if badly wrinkled, and ventured out into the main room. Elijah was at the stove, frying eggs and bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up when she entered, and something in his expression eased when he saw her. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's hot. Cups are on the shelf." She poured herself a cup and stood awkwardly by the table, not sure what to do with herself. The warm domesticity of the scene felt foreign after weeks of running and hiding. "Sit," Elijah said, nodding toward the table. "Breakfast will be ready in a minute." She sat, wrapping her hands around the warm cup and watching him work. He moved with easy efficiency, someone comfortable in his own space and his own skin. There was something calming about it, about the simple ritual of making breakfast while morning light filled the kitchen. He brought 2 plates to the table and settled across from her. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "We need to talk about your situation." Abigail's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "I know. This land you inherited. Do you still have the deed?" "Hidden in my bag. It's all I managed to grab when I ran." "Good. That's good." Elijah took a sip of coffee, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Kincaid can't do anything legally without it." "But you said he's dangerous. What exactly did you mean by that?" She set down her fork, appetite fading. "He has men who work for him. Not just business associates, but the kind who do the dirty work. Intimidation, violence if necessary. One of them shot a homesteader who wouldn't sell his land. Made it look like an accident, but everyone knew. And the law did nothing. The law in Guthrie belongs to whoever has the most money and influence. Right now, that's Kincaid." Elijah's jaw tightened. "How many men does he have?" "3 that I know of for certain. Maybe more." "All right." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "We need to be smart about this. First thing, I need to ride out and check your property. See if anyone's watching it, or if Kincaid's already made a move on it." Fear shot through her. "You can't. If they see you..." "They won't. I know how to scout without being seen, learned it in the cavalry. I'll be careful, I promise." His eyes met hers steadily. "But we need to know what we're dealing with." She wanted to argue, to tell him it was too dangerous, that he shouldn't risk himself for her problems. But the stubborn set of his jaw told her arguing would be pointless. And honestly, he was right. They needed information. "How long will you be gone?" "Most of the day. Your place is about 15 miles northeast of here, if I've got my bearings right. I'll ride out, take a look around, and be back before dark." He paused. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I've been alone for weeks. I think I can manage a few hours." Something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. "I'll show you where the rifle is before I go, and I'll make sure the doors and windows are secure. Anyone comes around who isn't me, you don't open the door. Understood?" "Understood." After breakfast, he showed her the rifle mounted above the fireplace and made her demonstrate that she knew how to load and fire it. Then, he saddled his brown quarter horse and rode out, leaving her alone in the quiet house. Abigail spent the morning cleaning, more to keep her hands busy than because the place needed it. Elijah kept a tidy home, but there were small things she could do. Dishes to wash, floors to sweep, mending to be done on a torn shirt she found in the laundry pile. Simple domestic tasks that made her feel useful and helped keep the fear at bay. But as afternoon stretched toward evening, and Elijah still hadn't returned, the fear crept back. What if Kincaid's men had caught him? What if he was hurt or captured? What if she'd brought danger to this good man's doorstep and gotten him killed for his kindness? She paced the floor, jumping at every sound outside. Once it was just a crow landing on the porch rail. Another time, a branch blown against the window. Her nerves were stretched tight as wire by the time she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her when she saw it was Elijah, riding alone and seemingly unhurt. She met him on the porch, trying to keep the worry off her face and failing completely. He dismounted and tied his horse, then climbed the steps to join her. His expression was grim. "What did you find?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Your homestead's been claimed. There are 3 men living in your uncle's house, and they've put up new fencing around the property. Posted a notice on the door saying it's been seized for unpaid debts." Anger surged through her fear. "That's a lie. My uncle owned that land free and clear. And even if there had been debts, I inherited the property. They can't just take it. They can if the law lets them. And from what you've told me about Kincaid's influence, he probably has someone in the land office or the marshal's office who'll back up whatever story he's selling." Abigail sank down onto the porch step, her legs suddenly weak. "Then it's over. He wins. All that running, all that fear, and he still gets what he wants." Elijah sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool autumn air. "It's not over. Not by a long shot." "How can you say that? He's stolen my land, and there's nothing I can do about it." "There's always something you can do." His voice was calm, certain. "We just have to be smarter than him." She turned to look at him, taking in the determination in his blue eyes and the set of his jaw. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that Kincaid's playing a long game, which means he's patient. He probably figures you'll either come back eventually to fight for your land, or you'll give up and he'll have it without a fight. Either way, he wins." Elijah paused. "Unless we change the rules." "How?" "By not playing his game at all. By building something here instead." Confusion must have shown on her face, because he continued. "You stay here. Help me run this ranch. In the eyes of the law, you're my employee, nothing more. Kincaid can't touch you as long as you're on my property. And he can't force you to sign over a deed you'll never be in a position to use anyway. Eventually, he'll lose interest and move on to easier prey." It made a certain sense, but something twisted in Abigail's chest at the thought of letting Kincaid have her uncle's land, her only connection to family and home. "So I just give up? Let him win?" "You survive." Elijah's hand found hers, rough calluses warm against her cold fingers. "You live to fight another day. And maybe someday, when Kincaid's moved on and the dust has settled, we figure out a way to get your land back. But right now, survival is enough." She stared down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers with such gentleness despite their strength. "Why are you doing this? Really? It's more than just helping a stranger. You could get hurt, lose everything you've built here. Why risk it? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb moving in small circles against the back of her hand. Because the day I rode into this territory, I was done, ready to put a bullet in my head and be finished with the weight of all I'd done and all I'd lost. The man who owned this place then, Jake Morrison, he took one look at me and saw right through to the broken pieces, gave me work and purpose, and didn't ask about the nightmares that woke me screaming. His voice roughened. He saved my life by giving me a reason to keep living. And before he died, he told me that the only way to honor that gift was to pass it on, to help someone else when I could, the way he'd helped me. He looked up then, meeting her eyes directly. You're not the only one fighting ghosts, Abigail. Maybe we can help each other. Something shifted inside her chest, some locked door beginning to open. She'd been alone for so long, carrying her burdens and fears in silence, because there was no one to share them with. But sitting here on this porch with this quiet, steady man, she felt the terrible weight of isolation begin to lift. I'm afraid, she whispered. Afraid that Kincaid will find me here. Afraid that something will happen to you because of me. Afraid that I'll never be safe again. Fear's not a weakness. Elijah's hand tightened on hers. It's proof you're still fighting, still alive. The day you stop being afraid is the day you stop caring whether you survive or not. Is that what war taught you? War taught me a lot of things. Most of them I wish I could forget. But that one, yeah, that one's worth remembering. They sat in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. The vast openness that had terrified Abigail when she was running now felt peaceful, even protective. Out here, she could see danger coming from miles away. Out here, with Elijah beside her, she felt safer than she had in months. I'll stay, she said finally. If you're sure you want me here, I'm sure. And we'll fight Kincaid together. However long it takes. However long it takes, he agreed. The words felt like a promise, like a line drawn in the dirt that neither of them would cross back over. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Two people running from their pasts, trying to build something worth staying for. Abigail squeezed his hand, then reluctantly let go and stood. I should start dinner. It's the least I can do. Sounds good. I'll tend to the horse and check the stock. He rose as well, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer. Thank you, Abigail, for trusting me. Thank you for giving me a reason to. As she headed inside to prepare their meal, and he walked toward the barn, Abigail felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope. Fragile and tentative, like the first green shoots after a prairie fire, but real nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this after all. And maybe, with Elijah Chambers watching her back, she could do more than survive. Maybe she could actually live. The days settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Abigail rose each morning to make breakfast, while Elijah tended the animals. They ate together, planned the day's work, then separated to their tasks. She kept the house, mended clothes, tended the small vegetable garden behind the barn. He worked the land, repaired fences, managed the small herd of cattle that formed the ranch's livelihood. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch or by the fire, talking about nothing and everything. He told her about the war, the cavalry campaigns against Confederate forces, the things he'd seen and done that still haunted his sleep. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, her parents dying of fever when she was 15, coming west with her uncle to start fresh. The more they talked, the more Abigail found herself watching him. The way his hands moved when he worked, competent and sure. The rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. The patience he showed with everything, from fixing a broken gate to listening to her rambling stories about nothing in particular. She was starting to care for him, she realized, with equal parts wonder and fear. Not just gratitude for his help, but genuine affection for the man himself. It had been so long since she'd let herself feel anything for anyone that the sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. 2 weeks after her arrival, she was hanging laundry in the yard when a rider appeared on the eastern horizon. Her heart seized with instant terror. She dropped the shirt she'd been hanging and ran for the house, but Elijah was already there, rifle in hand. "Get inside," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Elijah." "Inside, Abigail." "Now." She obeyed, but stood just inside the door where she could see through the window. The rider drew closer, and she could make out details now. A man in a dark coat, riding a gray horse. Not one of Kincaid's men that she recognized, but that meant nothing. Elijah waited on the porch, rifle held ready but not raised. The rider pulled up at a respectful distance and raised one hand in greeting. "Looking for Elijah Chambers," the man called out. "You found him. State your business." The rider dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Name's Tom Garrett. I'm a territorial marshal out of Oklahoma Station. Got some questions about a woman who might have passed through these parts." Abigail's blood ran cold. Kincaid had gotten the law involved. Of course he had. He was smart enough to make it look official, to use the system against her. "What woman?" Elijah's voice gave nothing away. Marshal Garrett pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Abigail Sterling, wanted for theft and fraud in Guthrie. Man named Elias Kincaid filed charges. Says she stole property documents and money, then fled. You seen anyone matching her description?" "Theft and fraud," Elijah repeated, his tone flat. "That's interesting, considering Miss Sterling is the legal owner of the property Kincaid's currently occupying." The marshal's expression shifted slightly. "You know her then?" "She's here. And she's not running from the law. She's running from a con man who wants to steal her inheritance." Elijah lowered the rifle, but his posture remained alert. "Come inside, Marshal. I think you need to hear both sides of this story." Garrett hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." Abigail stepped back from the door as Elijah and the marshal entered. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet the lawman's eyes without flinching. "Miss Sterling," Garrett said, studying her carefully. "You've caused quite a stir back in Guthrie. I'm sure Mr. Kincaid has told you his version of events," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Would you like to hear mine? That's why I'm here." She told him everything, about Kincaid's courtship, about the drunk associate who'd revealed the truth, about the threat Kincaid had made when she went to the marshal in Guthrie. She showed Garrett the deed to her uncle's property, proved her ownership was legal and clear. "The marshal in Guthrie told me there was nothing he could do," she finished, "that I had no proof. 2 days later, Kincaid came to my door and threatened me. So I ran." Garrett listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "This is a complicated situation," he said finally. "On one hand, Kincaid's filed official charges. On the other, what you're describing is a pattern of criminal behavior that needs investigating." "So what happens now?" Elijah asked. "Now I go back to Oklahoma Station and file a report. I'll also ride up to Guthrie and ask some hard questions about why the marshal there dismissed Miss Sterling's complaints." Garrett stood, settling his hat back on his head. "In the meantime, Miss Sterling, I'd advise you to stay right where you are. Don't give Kincaid any excuse to say you're fleeing justice." "She's not going anywhere," Elijah said firmly. "She's safe here." Garrett's eyes moved between them, something calculating in his expression. "I can see that. Mr. Chambers, you understand you're putting yourself at risk by harboring someone wanted on criminal charges?" "I understand I'm protecting an innocent woman from a dangerous man, and I'll keep doing that until the law catches up with the truth." The marshal almost smiled. "Fair enough. I'll be in touch." After Garrett rode away, Abigail sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak with relief. "Do you think he believed me?" "I think he's a good lawman who knows there's more to this story than Kincaid's version." Elijah set the rifle aside and crouched in front of her chair. "You did good, Abigail. You told the truth clearly, and you didn't fall apart. That takes courage." "I was terrified." "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear." His hand covered hers where it rested on her knee. "And you've got more courage than anyone I've ever met." She looked down at his hand on hers, at the calluses and scars that told stories of hard work and harder times. Slowly, almost without thinking, she turned her hand over, so their palms pressed together, fingers intertwining. "I couldn't do this without you," she said softly. "Without knowing you're here, that I'm not alone in this fight. That means everything, Elijah." Something shifted in his expression, something warm and intense that made her breath catch. "You're not alone. Not anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken words and feelings neither was quite ready to name. Then Elijah squeezed her hand gently and stood, breaking the spell. "Come on," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I'll teach you to shoot properly. If trouble comes, I want you able to defend yourself." They spent the afternoon behind the barn, Elijah patiently teaching her how to hold the rifle steady, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger rather than jerk it. His hands were gentle but firm as he adjusted her stance, his body warm when he stood close to demonstrate the proper position. By the time the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Abigail could hit a target more often than not. More importantly, the terror that had gripped her when the marshal appeared had faded to manageable anxiety. She was learning to fight back, to stand her ground rather than just run. That night after dinner, they sat by the fire as usual. But something had changed between them. Some invisible line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Abigail found herself hyper-aware of Elijah's presence, of the way firelight played across his features, and the quiet strength he radiated even at rest. "Can I ask you something?" she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Anything. Why haven't you married? A man like you, with land and a good heart, women must have shown interest." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. After the war, I didn't feel like I had the right. Marriage, family, normal life, those seemed like things for men who deserved them. Men who hadn't done what I'd done. He paused, and by the time I'd worked through enough of that to think maybe I could have those things after all, I'd gotten used to being alone. Started thinking maybe that was better. Safer. Can't hurt anyone if you keep them at a distance. That sounds lonely. It is. He glanced at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. But lately I've been thinking maybe alone isn't better after all. Maybe safe isn't worth the cost if it means never connecting with anyone. Abigail's heart hammered. What changed your mind? A woman who ran into a storm rather than give up her freedom. A woman who's been terrified every day but keeps getting up and fighting anyway. A woman who makes this house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Abigail couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of what he was saying and what it meant. "Elijah," she whispered. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his blue eyes stole what little breath she had left. "I know this is complicated. I know you're dealing with enough without me adding more to your plate. But I need you to know that having you here, it's changed something in me. Made me remember what it feels like to care about someone. To want to be better for someone besides myself." She should be cautious. Should remember that she was still running from one man and shouldn't let herself fall for another. But looking at Elijah, at the honesty and hope in his face, she couldn't make herself hold back. "You've changed something in me too," she admitted. "Made me remember that not all men are like Kincaid, that there are still good people in the world worth trusting, worth caring about." Abigail. Whatever he'd been about to say was cut off by the sound of breaking glass. They both jumped to their feet as a rock sailed through the window, landing in the middle of the floor, wrapped in paper. Elijah had his rifle in hand instantly, moving to the broken window and scanning the darkness outside. "Stay back." Abigail picked up the rock with shaking hands and unwrapped the paper. The message was brief and threatening. "You can't hide forever. Give back what you stole or pay the price. This is your last warning. EK." Her blood ran cold. "He found me. Or his men did." Elijah moved away from the window, his expression grim. "But they're cowards if they're throwing rocks instead of facing us directly. They're testing, seeing if we'll scare easy." Abigail crumpled the note in her fist, anger burning through her fear. "I won't run again. Not from here. Not from you." Elijah's expression softened even as his jaw remained set with determination. "Good. Because I won't let you face this alone." They spent the rest of the night on guard, taking turns watching while the other dozed in a chair. No further attacks came, but the message had been received. Kincaid knew where she was, and he wasn't going to let this go. As dawn broke gray and cold, Abigail stood on the porch looking out at the prairie. Somewhere out there, Kincaid and his men were planning their next move. But she wasn't the same terrified woman who'd fled into a storm weeks ago. She had allies now. She had purpose. And most importantly, she had something worth fighting for. She felt Elijah come up behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. When he put a hand on her shoulder, she leaned back into his warmth without thinking. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. "Together." "Together," she agreed. Whatever came next, Whatever Kincaid threw at them, they'd face it side by side. And that made all the difference. The next few days passed in tense watchfulness. Elijah taught Abigail more about shooting, about watching the horizon for riders, about the 100 small signs that someone might be approaching. She proved a quick study, her fear transforming into focused determination. They also fortified the ranch. Elijah reinforced the doors and shutters, positioned rifles in strategic locations, made sure they had supplies to withstand a siege if necessary. It reminded Abigail uncomfortably of war preparations, and she wondered, not for the first time, what Elijah had seen and done in his cavalry days. On the 4th day after the rock through the window, Marshal Garrett returned. This time, he brought news. "I've been asking questions in Guthrie," he told them over coffee at the kitchen table. "Turns out Kincaid's story doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The marshal there admitted he didn't investigate your claims properly, Miss Sterling. Said Kincaid had been generous to the town, and he didn't want to make trouble without solid proof." "Generous meaning he paid them off," Abigail said bitterly. "Probably. But here's the interesting part. I found the drunk associate you mentioned. Man named Pete Rollins. Once I got him talking, he admitted everything. Told me about the scheme, about the other women Kincaid's targeted, even about the woman who disappeared." Hope flared in Abigail's chest. "So you can arrest him?" Garrett's expression turned regretful. "I would, except Kincaid's gone. Cleared out of Guthrie 3 days ago, right after I started asking questions. Took his men and vanished. The hope died as quickly as it had sparked. So he's still out there, still coming for me. Maybe. Or maybe he cut his losses and moved on to easier prey. Men like Kincaid, they don't usually stick around when the law starts closing in." The marshal set down his cup. "What I can do is clear the charges against you. You're no longer wanted for anything, Miss Sterling. You're free." Free. The word should have brought relief, but all Abigail felt was uncertainty. Free to do what? Return to her uncle's homestead, now occupied by squatters she'd have to fight in court to remove? Go back east where she had no family and no prospects? Stay here with Elijah and hope Kincaid truly had moved on? "Thank you, Marshal," she said quietly. "I appreciate everything you've done." After Garrett left, Abigail stood in the yard feeling unmoored. She'd been running for so long that she didn't know how to stop, didn't know what came next now, that the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Elijah found her there, staring out at nothing. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know. That's the problem. For weeks I've been focused on survival, on getting through each day. But now, the charges are dropped, and Kincaid's gone, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "What do you want to do?" She turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her and sheltered her, and asked nothing in return. This man who'd shown her what kindness looked like, what real strength was. This man who made her feel safe and seen and valued in ways she'd never experienced before. "I want to stay," she said, "if you'll have me. Not just as an employee or a refugee, but as someone who chooses to be here, who wants to build something with you." His eyes widened slightly. "Abigail, I know it's complicated. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've never felt as safe or as valued as I do when I'm with you. You've given me back something I thought I'd lost, something I didn't even know I was missing until you showed me what it looked like. What's that? Hope. The belief that good things are still possible, that not everyone is out to hurt me, that I deserve happiness and partnership instead of just survival. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. You make me want to stop running, Elijah. You make me want to stay. For a long moment, he just looked at her, something fierce and tender warring in his expression. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. I want you to stay too, he said, his voice rough. More than I've wanted anything in a long time. But I need you to be sure, Abigail. Not grateful, not just seeking shelter. Sure that this is what you want. I'm sure. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. I've never been more sure of anything. He searched her eyes for another moment, then slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. He leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost questioning. But when she made a soft sound and leaned into him, one hand fisting in his shirt, the kiss deepened. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and she felt the solid strength of him against her, felt safe and wanted and cherished in ways she'd never imagined possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. Stay, he whispered. Stay with me. Help me build something worth having. A home, a life, maybe someday a family. Stay and let me show you every day what it means to be loved by someone who sees you and values you and wants nothing more than your happiness. Tears stung her eyes, but these were good tears. Happy tears. Yes. To all of it, yes. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt something that had been locked tight in her chest for years finally break open. She'd been so afraid for so long, so convinced that caring for someone would only lead to loss and pain. But standing here in Elijah's arms, feeling his heart beat steady and strong against hers, she understood that love wasn't about safety. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to risk heartbreak for the chance at something real. They spent the evening making plans. Not grand schemes, just simple dreams. Expanding the garden come spring. Maybe getting a milk cow. Building an addition to the house if they needed more room. Small things that added up to a life. A future. A home built together. As darkness fell and they sat by the fire, Abigail leaned against Elijah's shoulder, his arm around her waist. For the first time since her uncle died, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Like she'd found not just a place to live, but a reason to thrive. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For pulling me from the storm, for giving me shelter and safety and time to heal, for showing me what real kindness looks like, for helping me remember that I'm worth more than whatever value men like Kincaid try to put on me. His arm tightened around her. You never needed me to teach you that. You already knew your worth. You just needed someone to remind you to believe in it. She turned to look up at him. This quiet, steady man who'd changed everything. I love you, Elijah Chambers. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but it's true. I love you. His breath caught, and for a moment she saw vulnerability flash across his face. The wonder of someone who'd stopped believing he deserved to be loved. Then he smiled. Really smiled. and it transformed his entire face. I love you too, Abigail Sterling. Have since you stood on my porch soaked and shivering, and refused to let fear break you. You're the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. And I thank God every day that I found you in that storm. She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it. Relief and joy and love and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. They'd both been running from their pasts, carrying ghosts and regrets they thought would never let them go. But somehow, in the middle of nowhere, on an Oklahoma Territory ranch, they'd found each other. Two broken people learning to be whole again. Two survivors choosing to live instead of just exist. And that, Abigail thought as Elijah held her close and the fire crackled warm beside them, was its own kind of miracle. A week later, Abigail woke to the sound of riders approaching. Multiple riders, coming fast. Fear shot through her, memories of the rock through the window flooding back. She was out of bed and reaching for her clothes when Elijah appeared in her doorway, already dressed and armed. How many? She asked, pulling on her dress with shaking hands. 4, maybe 5. Could be Kincaid, could be someone else entirely. Either way, we're ready. His voice was calm, that cavalry-trained steadiness that had seen him through battles. Get the rifle and position yourself by the window like we practiced. Don't shoot unless I give the word or someone tries to force their way in. She nodded, swallowing her fear. They'd prepared for this. She knew what to do. By the time the riders pulled up in the yard, Abigail was at her post, rifle loaded and ready. Elijah stood on the porch, his own rifle held loose but ready to raise in an instant. The lead rider was a man in his 40s, well dressed in a way that suggested money and authority. Behind him rode 4 others, hard-looking men who carried themselves like hired guns. Abigail's stomach dropped. This was it. Kincaid had come for her, after all. But then the lead rider spoke, and his voice was cultured, almost friendly. Mr. Chambers? I'm looking for a woman named Abigail Sterling. I understand she may be staying with you. Who's asking? My name is Robert Sterling. I'm Abigail's cousin. I've been searching for her since I heard about the trouble in Guthrie. Cousin. Abigail's mind reeled. Her uncle had had a brother back east, and that brother had a son. But she hadn't seen Robert since they were children. Hadn't even known he was aware of her existence. Elijah glanced back toward the window where Abigail was hidden. If you're family, prove it. Tell me something only a cousin would know. Robert considered for a moment. Abigail's mother made the best apple pie in 3 counties, and she always put cinnamon in the crust, not just the filling. Abigail tried to make it once when she was 12 and used salt instead of sugar. Nearly poisoned the whole family. Despite everything, Abigail almost laughed. It was true. She'd been so embarrassed, she'd cried for hours. She set down the rifle and came to the door, stepping onto the porch beside Elijah. Robert? The man's face broke into a wide smile. Abigail! Thank God! I've been so worried. What are you doing here? He dismounted and climbed the porch steps, though he stopped at a respectful distance when Elijah shifted slightly, putting himself between Robert and Abigail. When I heard about Uncle James dying and leaving you his homestead, I tried to write. But the letters kept coming back undeliverable. Then I heard rumors about a con man operating in the territory, targeting women with property. I got worried and came to check on you myself." "You're about a month too late," Abigail said, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Kincaid already tried to steal the land, already threatened me and forced me to run." Robert's expression darkened. "I heard, asked around in Guthrie, got the whole story. That's why I brought reinforcements." He gestured to the men behind him. "These gentlemen are Pinkerton agents. They've been tracking Kincaid for over a year, gathering evidence on his various schemes. Thanks to your testimony to Marshal Garrett, they finally have enough to issue a warrant." Hope flared in Abigail's chest. "So he can be arrested?" "More than that. We can take back your property and prosecute him for everything he's done. The Pinkertons have statements from 2 other women he targeted, plus financial records showing a pattern of fraud going back 5 years. Robert paused. "But we need you to testify. Your case will be the strongest, because we can prove direct threat and intimidation. Testify. Face Kincaid in court and tell the world what he'd done, what he'd tried to do." The thought terrified her. But she'd also learned something these past weeks with Elijah. Sometimes courage meant being afraid and doing it anyway. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "Whatever you need." Robert's smile widened. "Thank you. And there's more good news. I've filed a motion with the Territorial Land Office to have Kincaid's claim on your property invalidated. With the fraud charges and your cousin's testimony supporting your ownership, it should go through quickly. You'll have your land back, Abigail." Her land. The homestead her uncle had left her, the 40 acres that had started all this trouble. She should have been overjoyed, but all she felt was conflicted. That land represented her past, her connection to family, and the life she'd lost. But this ranch, this place with Elijah, that felt like her future. "That's wonderful news," Elijah said beside her, though his voice was carefully neutral. "Your cousin's done right by you, Abigail." She looked up at him and saw the carefully controlled expression on his face. He thought she was going to leave, she realized. Thought she'd take her land back and return to her old life, leaving him behind. "Can you give us a moment?" she asked Robert. "I need to talk to Elijah." Robert nodded and stepped back down to the yard with his men. Abigail pulled Elijah inside and closed the door. "I'm not leaving," she said immediately. "Abigail, that's your property, your inheritance. You should take it back." "I know, and I will, but that doesn't mean I have to live there." She took his hands, holding them tight. "Elijah, I meant what I said. I want to stay here with you. The homestead can be sold or rented, or I can deed it to someone who needs it. But this ranch, this is my home now. You're my home." Relief flooded his face, so profound it made her chest ache. "Are you sure? I don't want you giving up what's yours for me." "I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing what matters most." She squeezed his hands. "You asked me to stay, to build a life with you. That offer still stand?" "Always. Every day for the rest of my life, that offer stands." She kissed him, quick and fierce and full of promise. "Then let's get this mess with Kincaid settled once and for all, and then let's start building our future. Together." His arms came around her, holding her close. "Together," he agreed. They went back outside to find Robert watching them with knowing amusement. "I take it you two have reached an understanding?" More than that, Elijah said, and there was pride in his voice as he kept his arm around Abigail's waist. We're building a life together. But first, we need to deal with Kincaid. Well then, Robert's smile turned sharp. Let's go catch ourselves a con man. The next week passed in a flurry of activity. Robert and the Pinkertons tracked Kincaid to a town 30 miles south, where he'd been setting up his next scheme with a widow who owned a profitable boarding house. They arrested him without incident, Kincaid being smart enough to know when he was cornered. Abigail traveled to Oklahoma Station with Elijah to give her testimony. Facing Kincaid across the courtroom was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. But she stood tall and told the truth clearly. Elijah sat in the front row the entire time, his steady presence giving her the courage to keep going. Kincaid was sentenced to 15 years for fraud, theft, and criminal intimidation. His property was seized to pay restitution to his victims, and Abigail's homestead was officially returned to her, all squatters removed, and her ownership reaffirmed. True to her word, she didn't move back to the homestead. Instead, she leased it to a young couple just starting out, a family who needed the land and would care for it properly. The income wasn't much, but it was enough to help support the ranch and gave her a connection to her uncle's legacy without tying her to the past. With Kincaid in prison and the legal troubles behind them, Abigail and Elijah settled into their life together. They expanded the ranch, bought more cattle, planted a bigger garden. Robert visited when he could, delighted to have his cousin back in his life and clearly approving of Elijah. On a clear autumn evening, 2 months after Kincaid's arrest, Elijah took Abigail's hand as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and amber. "Marry me," he said simply. Her heart jumped, even though part of her had been expecting this. Is that a question or a command? A question, and a hope, and a promise that if you say yes, I'll spend every day of the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. She turned to face him fully, taking in the face she'd come to know as well as her own. The blue eyes that saw her truly. The strong hands that had pulled her from a storm and held her through nightmares. The steady heart that had taught her what real love looked like. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Yes." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both smiling like fools, he pressed something into her hand. A simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "Only thing I have left of her. I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Abigail slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It's beautiful. She was lucky to have a son like you. I'm the lucky one. To have found you. To have earned your trust and your love. To get to build a future with the bravest woman I've ever known." They sat together as the sun sank lower, hands intertwined, the ring on Abigail's finger catching the golden light. Tomorrow they'd start making plans for a wedding, probably something simple with just Robert and a few neighbors as witnesses. But tonight was just for them, for this perfect moment of promise and possibility. Abigail leaned her head on Elijah's shoulder, feeling peace settle over her like a warm blanket. She'd run so far and fought so hard to get here, but it had been worth every terrifying step, because it had led her to this man, this place, this life she was choosing with open eyes and an open heart. "I love you," she whispered. I love you too. Always will. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they'd been through and everything they'd built together. Two people who'd been running from their pasts had found each other and chosen to stop running, chosen to stand and fight and build something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd lost. That, Abigail thought, was the real miracle. Not that she'd survived the storm, but that she'd found someone worth surviving for. Someone who made her want to do more than just exist. Someone who made her want to truly live. 3 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, with frost glittering on the prairie grass, Abigail Sterling became Abigail Chambers. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church in the nearest town, with Robert standing as witness, and Marshal Garrett in attendance to celebrate the justice finally served. Abigail wore her burgundy dress cleaned and mended, with wildflowers in her hair that Elijah had picked that morning. He wore his best shirt and vest, clean-shaven for the occasion, his blue eyes warm and steady as he said his vows. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Elijah kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. The small gathering applauded, and then they were walking back down the aisle hand in hand, husband and wife, partners in all things. They rode back to the ranch together, Abigail seated in front of Elijah on his horse, his arms secure around her as the November wind whipped past. When they arrived home, he lifted her down and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition of it. Inside, the fire was already burning, Robert having ridden ahead to make sure everything was ready. He'd left quietly, giving them privacy for their first evening as husband and wife. Elijah set Abigail down gently, then cupped her face in his hands. Happy? Happier than I ever thought possible, she said honestly. When I ran into that storm, I thought my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. But I found something better than what I'd lost. I found you. We found each other, he corrected gently. Two people who'd given up on happiness, who thought they were too broken to deserve it. And somehow, we proved that wrong. She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. They spent their wedding evening as they'd spent so many others, sitting by the fire and talking about everything and nothing. But tonight there was a difference, a deeper intimacy in knowing they were bound together now, committed before God, and witnesses to build a life as one. As the fire burned low and the stars came out beyond the window, Elijah took her hand and led her to their bedroom, the room that was now truly theirs. He kissed her at the threshold, gentle and reverent, and she felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. This was what she'd been running toward all along, she realized. Not away from danger, but toward this man, this love, this life they'd build together. Every difficult step, every moment of fear, had been worth it to arrive here. Morning came soft and golden, sunlight streaming through the window to paint warm stripes across their bed. Abigail woke wrapped in Elijah's arms, his chest rising and falling steadily beneath her cheek. She'd never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely at peace. He stirred, tightening his arms around her. "Good morning, Mrs. Chambers." She smiled against his skin. "Good morning, husband." They rose eventually, dressed, and made breakfast together in their kitchen. Everything felt new and wonderful, every ordinary moment transformed by the knowledge that they were building this life together, that they'd chosen each other, and would keep choosing each other every day forward. After breakfast, they stood on the porch together, coffee cups in hand, looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The same prairie where Elijah had found her that stormy night, soaked and desperate and running for her life. "Thank you," Abigail said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me, for pulling me from the storm, for giving me a reason to stop running and start living, for loving me even when I was too afraid to believe I deserved it." Elijah set down his cup and pulled her close, his arms coming around her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust me, for choosing to stay when you could have run, for showing me that I wasn't too broken to love someone, to be loved, to have this." They stood together as the morning sun climbed higher, warming the frost-covered grass and promising another beautiful day. Around them, the ranch was quiet and peaceful, their little corner of the world where they'd build their future. Somewhere out there, Elias Kincaid sat in a prison cell paying for his crimes. Abigail's homestead was providing a young family with hope and opportunity. Robert had returned east with promises to visit again soon. And here, on this Oklahoma Territory ranch, two people who'd been lost had found their way home. Not to a place, but to each other. Abigail turned in Elijah's arms and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, she saw her own contentment reflected in his blue eyes. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Always."